Reading 23 from the Psychological Commentaries on the Teaching of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky by Dr. Maurice Nicoll, Volume 3. Coramide Ugle, March 23, 1946. The importance of observing mechanical disliking. In the recent commentaries, the main subject has been the sealing of oneself from life. The work cannot be formed in a person if he puts it right on the wayside of his life. The seed of the work will not grow if it is scattered on the wayside, as is clearly shown in the parable given by Christ of the sower and the seed, in which it is said that, quote, "The sower went forth to sow, and as he sowed, some fell by the wayside, and the devil came and devoured them." End quote. The devil, of course, is ordinary life and the world of the senses, and so the outer, mechanical side of us, which is occupied with all the cares and anxieties of life. We understand so far that the work must be protected in us from outside effects and must gradually penetrate more interiorly until finally it leads to contact with higher centers and real I. In this connection, at a recent meeting, we spoke about things that help to isolate us from the outer influences of life. All that the work teaches comes in here. First, we spoke about how knowledge of our being helps because we no longer trust ourselves or take ourselves for granted or live on the surface of ourselves, but begin to realize how we are many and how there are very dangerous I's in us from which we must separate. The next point was how we must practice non-identifying. Then we spoke about the importance of remembering oneself in the midst of life, and through that feeling, the difference between life and oneself. Self-remembering is, of course, the supreme thing to use. And finally, we spoke about how necessary it was to stop internal considering, which always arises from life situations, and which keeps us down in mechanical eyes, which cannot possibly understand the work and will only destroy it. It is obvious, then, that we have to create a special place for the reception of the ideas of this work. Tonight I will add one or two other comments on this question of how we must begin to seal a place in ourselves from life. I will mention first mechanical liking and disliking. If a person has very strong disliking, he will only reinforce his personality. When you reinforce your personality, you do not seal yourself from life, but increase your vulnerability to life. Some people admire their strong dislikes and prejudices, but that is a mistake. Let us reflect for a moment on what is the ultimate object that we have to attain. Before man can be reborn, the work teaches, he must realize his own nothingness. A person who has very strong dislikes and justifies them certainly does not realize his own nothingness. He feels himself very much to be something. It is a good thing to work on one's mechanical dislikes. But first of all, it is necessary to be able to observe them. This is always the starting point. If a man could really begin to feel his own nothingness, he would be moving inwardly towards real I, and certainly he could not be so full of mechanical dislikes. A strong feeling of dislike simply strengthens our mechanical personality. We are told, in fact, to like what we now dislike, for this is acceptance, and all acceptance means the giving up of useless suffering. If you persist in dislike and justify it and make a mass of internal accounts in connection with it, you are simply adding to your mechanical suffering and wasting your force and stopping the development of understanding. One of the ways towards feeling one's own nothingness genuinely is to begin to try to like what we dislike. To live in mechanical disliking is to live mechanically, and in that case, your being will remain exactly the same, and you will therefore attract exactly the same events. Or it is a good thing to say to yourself, what is my being like in regard to disliking? This is a practical way of beginning partly to see one's quality of being. You get a man, for example, who objects to most things, who dislikes most people. This arises from his level of being. He may find life very difficult, but he does not connect it with his state of being. He does not see that as long as all these dislikes and prejudices and narrow attitudes exist in him, his being cannot change, and certainly such a man will never be able to get near that point called in the work, the realization of one's own nothingness. Such a man will probably think that everyone dislikes him, and that if he could only go to a new environment and start over again, things would be different. But actually, his being would at once attract the same situations, and after a short time, in which he felt enthusiastic at meeting new people, he would find the same difficulties. For this reason, it is important to work on one's dislikes, especially on one's strong dislikes, which only increase the power of the personality, and through that, the power that life has over us. There will then be the question of sealing oneself from the effects of life, because strong dislikes will connect oneself with life continually, at every moment. There will be not even a breakwater, and certainly not a seal wall in such a man. In observing your disliking, start with your strong dislikes and try to make a list of them and write them down. Then say to yourself, how is it that I dislike this person or that nation? Now, I will tell you a way of beginning to deal with your strong dislikes once you have observed them. There are such things as irony and humor. I will only add that it is a good thing to begin to be ironical about yourself and amused by your prejudices. Now you will remember that we have to live more consciously in life. All this fourth way is based not on faith or hope or love, but on increase of consciousness. Faith, hope, and love, which have been in the past the basis of 3 major religions, are not excluded, but the emphasis in the fourth way is laid upon increase of consciousness, and that is why the fourth way begins with self-observation, the object of which is to make us conscious of ourselves, of what we are like, namely, to make us have real impersonal knowledge of our being. If a man has strong mechanical dislikes and is controlled by them, he is not living consciously. On the contrary, he is living mechanically. But if a man observes himself and becomes aware of his strong mechanical dislikes and the prejudices and attitudes that lie behind them, and begins to struggle with himself and refuse to go with them in a completely identified state, he is then breaking new ground in his own being and attempting to live more consciously. A moment or two of conscious behavior in the midst of life each day can give one increase of force and alter things a little. We can all work for a few moments every day in a real way. As I have told you repeatedly, we cannot work continuously because we have not sufficient force of consciousness. But every moment in which you behave more consciously and see clearly how you might have behaved mechanically gradually increases the force of consciousness in yourself. You may not see any particular result for the time being, but you will gradually see the result. That is, you will gradually notice that some mechanical reactions, mechanical thoughts, by which you had been changed down hitherto, have less and less mastery over you, and with that will come a change in the feeling of what you are. You may imagine that you used to be a stronger kind of person, but you are wrong, because your strength lay in mechanical reactions. You thought your violence was your strength. Violence in the work is always weakness. And so you begin to see a little what it means to realize your own nothingness. It is this realization of nothingness that can attract new being. But this feeling cannot be invented. It is no good saying that you are merely nothing, for such phrases conceal a great picture and so belong to false personality. One feels it, but does not say it. No one speaks of real feelings. When you begin to have traces of feeling, your nothingness and dislike of your hitherto-ness, you find yourself flexible, and so more capable. In fact, you feel released. Released from what? In my case, I feel released from Nicoll. As I said, strong personality is always a sign of weakness in the work sense. When a man cannot separate himself from himself, owing to his strong mechanical system of likes and dislikes, of thinking he is right and others are wrong, he is a weak man in the work sense. Such a man cannot change. He cannot seal himself from life, from himself, and so the work can never find its right soil. The seed of the work will be sown by the wayside, and so his mechanical centers, the devil, will come and snatch it up. In general, it is the personality that is the devil. Good soil is that which stands behind personality, that more interior understanding which is not influenced at every moment by the flickering events of life and by the mechanical responses of the personality to these events. Let me remind you what self-observation is, because without self-observation, no sealing can take place. A man is composed of many eyes, amongst which sits observing eye. These eyes are all looking at a play on the stage. The play represents life. This is the situation of man asleep. When a man begins to observe himself, observing eye turns round from the stage and looks at the audience and notices how each one is reacting. Some of these eyes are perhaps jumping up and down and shaking their fists at the play. Others are absorbed in it, others snoring, and so on. Observing eye begins to notice all these different reactions in the audience. This is self-observation.